The topic for today is nothing that is all that unusual to particular to North Carolina. This is something that public mental health systems throughout the country are facing to one degree or another. And you know, as we've sort of progressed in the realization of the integration mandate of the Americans with Disabilities Act, you know, we've been grappling with this question of, you know, what do we do when we fund and have public mental health systems that have a tendency to congregate and segregate a lot of people? And so what I'd like to suggest is, you know, in trying to answer what is to be done, the actual answer to what is who, and I'll explain that. When we're thinking about human services, I think we have to have a clear picture of who we are actually trying to serve and what their needs are. I think that systems get out of whack when they're not clear about who they're trying to serve and what their actual needs are. Sometimes it can be sort of this nameless, faceless thing, as opposed to, like I said, you know, people in our community, our neighbors, our friends, our family members. And I think that in thinking about that, in stressing the uniqueness of people, in stressing the fact that there's a political philosopher, her name is Hannah Arendt, and she has this concept of natality. And what it is that every human being that is born, it's this unique thing that will never, ever come again. No one else is going to be born in the same place at the same time to the same parents in the same context. And so it's trying to really affirm and recognize sort of the uniqueness and how interesting we are in a lot of ways. But at the same time, we all have these basic needs, basic fundamental human needs. And once you get past the obvious ones like, you know, food and water, the more and these, I guess, are just as obvious, but a safe, affordable, accessible place to live, a place you call home. And I think the thing that I would like to drive home is that in my role at the P&A, in going to see all of these different places, seeing some pretty horrific things, lots of death, lots of injuries, you know, in building our human service systems, in building our mental health system, if we don't have those basic human needs of home, relationships, freely given relationships, not paid, not people that are paid to be there today, freely given relationships and meaningful things to do with your day, if we don't have that at the center of what we are trying to accomplish in our mental health system, then it really doesn't matter how many services you build, how, you know, I mean, I'll tell you a story. There's a guy, so in Georgia, we've gone through our own sort of crisis, I guess, or hashing out of what this all means and what we're going to try and do to resolve it. Because Georgia likes to, we institutionalize a lot of people in our state hospitals. Okay, congregate, segregate settings where people are off. They're not a part of us. That we've now engaged in this trying to develop community-based services. Well, there's a guy who got discharged from one of our state hospitals recently, and because there was no housing, because he did not have a home, he lives in a tent. We can get him intensive community-based supports. We can get him a case manager. We can get somebody who goes out to see him every single day to check on him. But his existence daily is tenuous because he's stuck in a tent. We haven't addressed the basic human need of a home. And so one of the things that happened is the team took him to his doctor. Turns out he has sleep apnea. He needs to be on a CPAP at night. Guess what? He can't do it because he doesn't have electricity. So his health is compromised because he doesn't have a home, because he doesn't have a place to go home to address that. So like I said, we can build all sorts of mental health services, but unless we are focused on how those services integrate into and support basic human needs, we're not going to get very far. I mean, I think this is one of the things we really realized in Georgia, was that when you looked at what was happening to the folks that were going into our state hospitals and coming out and going back in, I mean, literally we had people who had been in 100 times in a year. I mean, can you imagine the disruption? It was because they didn't have a home to go to. They had nowhere to go. And if we could just stop and address that issue, I submit we would go much farther in trying to come up with supports and services that are relevant to what people actually need. I think one of the things that I have to bear mentioning too, in addition to the vulnerability around things like homes and relationships, jobs, meaningful things to do with your day, when we congregate and segregate people, I think we exacerbate the problem. Because in my experience in watching this, there's something inherent to our human condition that when we set up us and them, valued and devalued, server and served, prisoner and guard, however, whatever the dichotomy is, when you set that up, you will have abuse and neglect. I just see it again and again and again. You know, they did back when there was all the talk about Abu Ghraib, the prison in Iraq, and the abuse of people there. And how could this happen? And people started talking about this Stanford study that had been done in the 70s where grad students were separated between guards and prisoners. And within a few days, the guards started abusing the prisoners. In one of our most highly regarded universities, brilliant people, and they were doing this. So that's why I say there's something to our human condition. And I think that going back to what keeps us safe, what keeps us whole, again, it's relationships. And it's having some valued role. It's being a part of your community, a part of something. And it's when we break that, when we isolate people, that's when vulnerability comes to the fore. And I think that that's particularly true for people with disabilities who, by and large, in our society are disenfranchised and they don't have a voice. So I think that, what I want to be clear is that because of the inherent vulnerability that's created by congregation and segregation, that in my mind, from my perspective, there is no way to fix these places. There is no way to build a better mousetrap. You're not going to, congregate people and segregate them and not have bad things happen. Okay? So let's give that up. That would be my request. And that we go back to the question of what, right? Now that we've talked about who and basic needs, then what is it we should be doing? And I think that if we're going to have a coherent system of supports and services for folks, we have to have as the primary focus these basic human needs. And designing the supports such that they encourage, foster things like meaningful relationships in your life. Because if we construct the housing and the person goes to live there, but they're isolated and they don't have any friends and they don't have anything meaningful to do with their day, we haven't really done much. So I think the way we've got to be thinking about this is, as we endeavor to struggle around what we're going to build and how we're going to fund it and all that kind of stuff, that we have to keep going back to what are we trying to accomplish? Who is it we're trying to serve? And are there some basic things that we can, needs that we can fulfill or try to meet that will get us a long way. And I think that there are. We're doing it in Georgia. I think that, probably if you looked around North Carolina, you're going to find all kinds of great examples of people who are supported really well to live in their communities, to have meaningful, great relationships, very interesting things to do with their day, that explode the myth that, we can do it for some people, but not those people with extreme needs. No. I mean, we see it all the time. Even in places like Georgia, which they were really, really mad. And she said, okay, I'll meet with you. And she said, what is it? And she said that they were simply outraged that the staff, that the folks who were supporting this person would bring her to church wearing white shoes after Labor Day. And but to me though, it's an instructive story because it says, this is a member of our congregation. We want her to be a part of us, to be a part of the cultural norms that we have here. We have high expectations of the support she's going to be getting. And when she doesn't get it, we're going to let you know. We're part of, it. And that's what I'm talking about when I say real relationships. People are freely giving this. They're not paid to do this. They care about it. They care about their community. The other thing, and this is sort of the last piece, we're in this together. I think a lot of times when these things come up, there are lines drawn and one side and the other side. When we were negotiating the settlement in Georgia, we literally had to say at times across the table, look, we're not doing this to pick on you. We're not doing this because we're mean or bad people. We're doing this because we, like you, care about this issue and want to see Georgia do great things for people, that Georgia has the capacity to do it. We've seen it. It's out there. We want to see more of it. We want to see the best of us. And I think that that's probably what's going on here. And what I appreciate is the fact that people want to come together and have a conversation about this. And I would commend that you just keep talking and working on these things. But I'm going to sit down now. I look forward to questions. I want to talk about this, and I'll turn the mic over to Vicki. Thank you.
So I have to adjust downward. Good afternoon. I'm with Disability Rights North Carolina, your state, the state of North Carolina's protection and advocacy system. And like Josh, I'm thinking, and I had remarks prepared, and then he started talking, and it made me think more things. And then I was told not to rustle papers because there's a mic down here. So I'm feeling restricted by all of the rules that I have to follow in order to talk to you. And it puts me in the mind of the stress that it's causing me right now, and thinking about if I lived in an environment every day where almost everything I did was governed by a rule that someone else needed to put in place. They had nothing to do with my needs, but everything to do with the needs of the facility, or from the licensing requirements, or from the staff, but really not about what I needed to do. So I'm having a moment where I adjust my behavior. I think everybody in the room knows that in July, actually on July 28th, 2011, that the U.S. Department of Justice sent a letter to the state of North Carolina finding that it was indeed violating the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Olmstead decision rendered by the Supreme Court of this nation. It stated that the way North Carolina was administering its service system was needlessly segregating individuals with mental illness in adult care homes. And I might add, not just adult care homes, but many, many other places around the state, and not just people with mental illness, but all people with disabilities, intellectual and developmental disabilities, individuals with traumatic brain injury. This state has a supreme institutional bias about how it treats its citizens with disabilities. As noted in the DOJ letter, individuals with mental illness are placed in adult care homes not based on their clinical needs, but based more on the fact that integrated residential options are unavailable in North Carolina. And so there is no choice. There's no decision. It's just the way it is. The Department of Justice concluded that the needs of people with mental illness in adult care homes are not materially different from individuals with mental illness who currently live in integrated settings. There are many, many people in North Carolina who live with the challenges of having a mental illness, I am one, on a daily basis, and we don't live in integrated settings. We do live in integrated settings. We don't live in an adult care home. Why? Well, because I'm lucky. I have a job, so I'm gainfully employed. I have a job that's challenging but rewarding, and a job that I love, so it adds to the quality of life. But I also have a job that provides me with the money to go out and pay for my own housing. And one of the things that we've seen with the economic crisis is when you lose your job, what's the first thing that people start worrying about? Losing their home. And when they lose their home, it adds stress, and it's cyclical, and it has to do with quality of life. Now, we go out and we talk with many people who live in more restrictive settings, including adult care homes, and apparently so did the Department of Justice. And they found, when talking to residents, that many people would not be opposed to moving out if they had a choice and if they felt safe doing so because they had treatment options to go along with that. So it is about meaningful relationships, because that's how we feel safe. And I was glad that Josh provided, and talked about that a lot. But if you are uncertain, and if you don't have a place to call home, and if you don't feel safe in your home, then it is much harder to engage and develop meaningful relationships, because meaningful relationships are two-way. It takes time and energy. Anyone who has a meaningful relationship knows it's the toughest job you have. So it's a package. Here in North Carolina, we have to develop an array of housing options so that people have meaningful choice, can move into the home that they would like to have, can access the services that they need in order to stay there. And out of that, one of the net benefits would be those long-term meaningful relationships which keep people safe. So what are we working for here? Where are we? Department of Justice being here is an opportunity. The Delaware's Department of Health and Social Services Secretary, a woman named Rita Landgraf, I think I'm saying that right, made a statement. Let me pause and say Delaware is another one of those states where DOJ has come in and said, you're not doing right by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Let's sit down and talk about it. And here's what Rita said. The U.S. Department of Justice, to them, this is about fulfilling commitments under the ADA. But to us, the citizens of Delaware. It's about providing services to us, our neighbors, our family members, our friends who have persistent mental illness, but who can, with the right support, be very valuable members of the community, with the right support. So Disability Rights North Carolina is looking at, and a lot of people have said, so what are we talking about? What are you looking for? And can we really sit down and start planning those options? That's what DOJ actually provides us in terms of opportunity. You all are either part of the disability community or live in Raleigh or are interacting with policymakers on a regular basis. This state goes from one crisis to another. It goes from a budget crisis and looks at cuts. It responds to an article or a series of articles in the newspaper. It's never had the opportunity to sit down and develop a long-term plan on how it provides services, because the very structure of how policy is made is short-term. We only worry about this year's budget. We don't have time or the luxury of thinking about what we do today, how it will impact services next year. And worse, it's like an echo chamber, because we're really responding to what didn't happen last year because we didn't take the time to really develop meaningful plans. So DOJ is about time. And when the state sits down and really starts to engage with them, what will happen is an opportunity to think about what kind of community do we want to build? What kind of community, not just for people with mental illness, but for all North Carolinians? What do our communities look like? And what are the baby steps? And of course, it depends on how big the baby is or how tall the person is, because I don't have a long stride. But what are the steps that are necessary in order to build this community that we want to have? So we know that we need to have sufficient scattered site housing to ensure that people with mental illness or anyone with a disability have a chance to live and receive services in the most integrated setting appropriate to their needs. So some type of supported housing situation. We need to ensure that those folks are offered the supports and services needed to allow them to be successful. And it's going to vary. And Josh is right. We know what needs to be done in North Carolina. There's no one place in this great state where it's all there and adequately funded, because it's all about meeting the budget. So we need ACT where it's available. We absolutely need case management, crisis services, and guess what? Supported employment opportunities. Because our long-term goal in a community is to create an opportunity so that we don't have to worry about housing as a society, because housing will be my responsibility because I will be gainfully employed. But here we treat housing as separate from employment. We also need to make sure that people have choices. One of the things that I'm asked repeatedly is, so you're saying that everybody has to live in your own home and have 24/7 supports and services? No? For some people, that might be very real. But I know that I don't want to live alone. In fact, the few moments in time when I do, I'm very unhappy and very vulnerable. And so what we're talking about really are meaningful choices for individuals. Let them decide. And then let's ask them, what do you need in order to maintain this? That's a novel idea. DOJ gives us the opportunity to sit down and help develop this vision and get out of the cycle of responding to the immediate crisis and the short-term budget restrictions. Our focus must shift away from responding to those crises or the crisis du jour, because there will be one, and protecting the status quo. And we need to start focusing on building that community that is, its foundation is built on a system of care and treatment that allow people with mental illness and all people with disabilities real choices about where they live, and provide them with access to real services that promote greater independence and skill and the opportunities, most importantly, to make contributions back.